It's just important that you know I wasn't there. It's like, bro, that's the point in the alibi. You know, what's the point?
Yo, this is dope. First, before we dive in, it was about a week ago. I was talking to a good friend of mine he's kind of on the screen right now, but you can't really see him. He's going to go by the name of Jehovah's Witness Protection on this show, and we'll talk about why he goes by that name. This is not some kind of diss or some kind of a joke at the expense of Jehovah's Witnesses. This brother is not and was not a Jehovah's Witness, but we'll explain why he's going by that name as we get further into this show, or maybe the next show. But I was talking to this brother, and he was looking at all the responses to the book, to the book that I wrote, Let There Be Gaslight. This book right here, Let There Be Gaslight. And he was saying, man, all these people coming at you, you need help. You need a team. You need people with you. I was saying, I feel like I need more. It's almost like a little while ago, the rapper Royce the 5'9", he got into a beef with another rapper named Mickey Fax. It was a rap beef. They were just making diss tracks at each other. But it was Royce the 5'9" versus Lupe Fiasco and Mickey Fax, and they were like teaming up on him. And in a joking but serious way, Royce the 5'9" reached out to King Los and the guys from Slaughterhouse, the rap group, like, yo, y'all should come help me. They're jumping me. And for a while, I was like, man, all these people teaming up to make responses to my book, I should reach out for help. But I wasn't sure, like, who could I reach out to? But then these two brothers were already talking, like, man, he needs people. And I said, yo, it would be dope if we just got on a podcast type situation and talked about the responses to my book, if we responded to the responses, but then two, each of us have our own story. Everybody who's on the screen right now is a former Christian. And I know when I say former Christian, there are people who are going to say, if they went out from us, they were never really with us. But everyone on this screen right now has a testimony that when I was a Christian, I would have big up, like, yo, amen. That's bona fide. You're a believer. You're in the faith. You know him. And so it's funny because those who are in the faith, like I was in the faith, we have ways that we check for how authentic was your conversion. It's funny now that I've deconverted. I ask people, like, how authentic was your deconversion? Like, why did you deconvert? Was it just church? was it just church hurt? Was it, some other, peripheral reason?
Was it deconstruction?
Was it just deconstruction? Right. Or do you have real legitimate reasons to deconvert? So, I don't know. That's a human thing, I guess.
Amen.
It's a faith thing. Anyway, I gathered these brothers. We got my man Albert, who's out on the West Coast. We got Jay Witt, short for Jehovah's Witness Protection, and like I said, we'll get into all that. But if you guys just want to give a quick, we'll get into testimonies and testimonies probably on the next show. But if you just want to kind of chime in and say what made you want to have the conversation that we're about to have, I think that'd be good. We could start with Albert.
Yeah. So, hey everyone, my name is Albert. I first met Brady through another mutual friend, and I had heard about him. I had known about Cross Movement and Fanatic and just the importance that they had in the cultural scene in the early 2000s and late 90s, I think, right? Or more early 2000s. Yeah. And I had known about them at the time. So I grew up in the church without getting into more detail, but, I'd known about them. And then when I had learned about Brady, not that long ago, earlier this year. You know, well, number one, it was also kind of practical. You needed a designer to design your book. So I heard about your story. Um, I've been a designer for the last 10 years. And to me, it was, it's been 10 years since I've left the faith. And for me, it was kind of like,
Wait. You left the faith 10 years ago, and
10 years ago.
you didn't get struck by lightning, or the ground didn't open up and swallow you.
That's right. I've been, my heart's still beating.
Okay. I just wanted to...
Amen. That's grace. That's grace, brother. That's grace.
Common grace.
His kindness is leading you to
repentance. Hey, so but you know what, Jay Witt, while you're joking, just to show you how deep that psychological flex is, I often still have those like, man, am I just like, is this just God giving me a long leash to diss him, and then one day he's going to reel me back in? Like, yeah, I don't.
Nebuchadnezzar.
You know what I mean? There's no faith in me, but I still have that like, man, maybe this is just God being slow to wrath. You have those kind of psychological things that go on in your mind. So even as Jay Wood is saying, like, this is just grace, these are things that ex-believers, it's not really just a joke. Sometimes those jokes are like helping ourselves like wrestle with this. That's not what's going on, is it? Nah, that's not what's going on. And it kind of comes out that way. So I'm going to kind of be a reinterpreting some things as we have these conversations. But go ahead, Albert.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great comment. And I definitely happens, to me in terms of, there are old habits of thought that, kind of stick around, and, I felt like in the last 10 years, it's been a journey. And, but yeah, just going back to, the whole process of this and looking at, how the public has responded to the book, all of the debates that have come up, it's been really fascinating, but also very frustrating at the same time. But I'm on here because, I think, I felt like I have something to say, at least something to share. And, I wasn't, obviously I'm not seminary trained or anything, but for the longest time in my faith, I took theology really important. It was very important to me at the time. I was a very rigorous student, a layman student, I guess, of theology, and trying to understand the Christian faith as deeply as I could, both historically and metaphysically and things like that. So, yeah, that's my story.
Good stuff. And we'll get to much more of your story as we get further into these discussions. But Jay Witt, if you could just speak to real quick, why did you want to be a part of the conversation that we're going to have tonight and any future ones that we'll have?
Okay. First name, Jehovah's Witness. Last name, Protection. I had to make that flex. But, I've spoken to several friends when I was leaving the faith, friends who were in the faith, and they invariably all more or less stopped communicating with me, and the conversation, though on several occasions there was an indication that the conversation would be continued, it stopped. So when I say it was a one-sided, it was unilateral, to use theological language, a unilateral stopping of the conversation. It wasn't from me. I was eager to, I like interacting with people who in an antithetical way. I don't like speaking to people who all think exactly like I do. There's proof. There's a proof text for that. Iron sharpens iron, right? So you want to you want to engage with people who are thinking, and well, you said briefly, so we'll get to it. When you look at what's going on in the conversation over Brady's book, so, and I'm wording that particularly. I'm just imagine Brady's book on the table, and there's two interlocutors, and you have one on one side and another on the other side. They're having a conversation over his book. There's content in the book that they're discussing, and I feel like people are talking past each other. I feel like people they have points that are. There's an overused analogy of cookie cutter, but it feels like it's appropriate here, where you have ready-made rebuttals, and then you have content in the book that's very specific, and they're using very ready-made rebuttals to arguments that are being presented in the book that are very specific, and there's even a sense of, the Apostle Paul says, not many of you were wise. He's talking to his audience. And I always felt like it was, even as a Christian, it was like, Paul was educated at the feet of Gamaliel or Gamaliel or so,
Yeah.
I forget how you pronounce it. Different people, Gamaliel, some people say Gamaliel. But he was a scholar. He said that was spoken, I guess, based on his interactions. They knew he spoke several languages fluently. So when he's speaking to them, not many of you were wise. It's almost a flex, because we see in Acts 17 he's at the Areopagus, flexing among the intellectuals of his day, the intelligentsia. And so anyway, that's a bit of an excursus, but when you look at what's going on, there's this sense of, the Christians feel very wise. They feel like they are very proud of themselves and their erudition. And it's like, you could call this podcast a piece of humble pie, because that's what we plan to dish out. And this is a humble pie that hopefully we're partaking, we're eating ourselves, we're communing on this humble pie. I feel like there's a certain amount of humility. I'm not a person who believes all Christians are. I used to be a Christian, so I think it's a position that can be held by a person who's rational, who generally is thoughtful. We see what Francis Collins, he's in the Genome Project and stuff. There are plenty of very intelligent Christians. So when any jokes we get off, I think that people should receive them almost as coming from peers, because we were once Christians ourselves.
So here's what I'd like to do, just to kind of get us going. We are not going to, there's so much stuff that we can talk about that I think will be beneficial to other people, that we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at all the videos that people are making about Let There Be Gaslight, because there's too many of them, and I don't want to give them that much time anyway.
Yeah.
What I do want to do is address a few videos, particularly tonight, the one that was done with Dr. Michael Brown, where Vocab Malone brought him on to talk about the Hebrew in Genesis. And so we're going to do that tonight.
Who can I interject?
Sure.
Can I interject? Who, by the way, made a joke almost of saying that the first time he stepped into, I think he said like a seminary or Christian college, was to teach.
Right.
I think I remember him saying it, and I was about to say, and it shows. But anyway, that's all. I'm being ridiculous. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's just a joke, guys. Okay, that's just a joke.
People were saying after they watched that video with Vocab Malone and Michael Brown, they said, is Brady willing to come on and debate Dr. Michael Brown?
Right.
But as I watched the video, because I didn't see it when it aired, it was about maybe 45 minutes in when somebody texted me and said, hey, Dr. Michael Brown is talking to Vocab about you right now. And I jumped on Facebook, I saw some things, and then I went and got on YouTube, and I saw that saying knock, knock in the chat, like, yo, let me in. And then eventually they let me in. and me and Vocab talked after Michael Brown left. But it's interesting because as I watched it today for the first time, the part with Vocab and Dr. Brown talking, I don't think I need to debate Dr. Michael Brown.
Right.
Because as I watched it, it was very interesting. He didn't say anything that really disagreed with what I'm saying in my book. Like, he almost made all the points that I was making. And then the only point that I would disagree with him on is when he would say, and I can still believe it because of the reasons why he still believes it. I would say almost the same things that he's saying. And for me, I'm like, and that's why I don't believe it. But I wouldn't really have anything to debate with him on because when it comes to the scriptures, I don't even think he realizes that he said what I said they were discussing chapter 3 of my book. And it's like, yo, you said what I said. Or can I just say this too? The name of this video that they did is the Hebrew in Genesis translated wrong? And I always thought that was a bugged out title because I don't say the Hebrew is translated wrong. You don't really talk about right or wrong when you're dealing with translation of a text. You have options. And so the real question is, what we're reading in the English, is this the most likely rendering of what this was supposed to be? And so I do get into, there are other more likely translations, and then there are reasons why a translation committee would say, even though this might be more likely, we're going to go with this.
I agree with you, but I'm just kicking back on the principle here. What Vocab Malone is using here is what you call clickbait.
Oh, no, I understand. Yeah, I understand. But go ahead, make that point.
And there was a whole discussion with Adam 22 and I think it may have been Joe Budden. I think it was with him, and they were talking about the nature. Adam 22 thinks of clickbait as just being good titling because he's a YouTuber and he thinks if you're objective. Now he's a utilitarian in this sense. Like, he thinks if your objective is to get the most views on a thing, then it should be titled in such a way, even if some of the nuance is lost, it should be titled in such a way to fish your viewers.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, and I think that definitely is what's going on here. But the readers who are clicking this bait are taking the bait and thinking, so Brady's saying it's translated wrong. We're going to get Dr. Michael Brown to show that it wasn't translated wrong. So two things about that.
That's the nature of this.
Yeah,
this is a popular level conversation.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I just want the reader to understand, this is Vocab's phraseology, not mine. When I talk about how the text is translated, it's not about right or wrong. It's about more or less likely. But then two, the interesting thing for me is Dr. Brown is not going to come on and say, Brady's wrong, it was translated right. Dr. Brown is going to come on and say, it's more complex than that.
Right.
Well, this is a good place to pause and say that this is paradigmatic of the way they've dealt with your book in its entirety, in all of their videos. Yeah, it's all dealt with in this pop kind of. You wrote a nuanced 300 somewhat page, 300 and almost 400 page book, and they've distilled it, and you cooked them a 3-4 course meal, and they've taken people to McDonald's and said, this is what Brady is dished up. You see what I'm saying? So, but this is popular level. This is the kind of level of discussion you expect to get on YouTube over a book.
And then Brady raises, which most people think of immediately reading the Bible. Well, Genesis 1 seems different than Genesis 2 in terms of order. So those questions come up. And then where does Genesis fit with science and whether these literal days or not? You could say we have endless debates. No. We have no debate about why Genesis 1 is there. When you read it, what you get from it is God created, and this is who God is. So if it was created in a way, if the narrative is painted in a way that was more in keeping with ancient Near Eastern cosmologies, views of how the world existed, or the Bible talking about the world standing on pillars, did it mean literal pillars? Maybe the ancient world believed that. Or if it's written in a way that's more in keeping with the modern world, Isaiah saying, God sits on the circle of the earth, does that mean it's spherical and all that? Either way, that has no meaning to me. As a Hebrew scholar, as someone that studied these things, decades back, digging into it, It's there to teach me who God is and how he operates in this world. You can look at Origen, right? One of the great church scholars, second century, later rejected because of his universalist beliefs, read the Bible largely allegorically. But he was one of the great intellectual leaders in the early church. He said nobody with intelligence would take Genesis 2 or 3 to tell us that there was a literal tree that they ate, and if you ate it, it would make you wise. And this is all to teach us lessons. Did he believe in a literal Adam and Eve? Yes. Did he believe in a literal fall? Yes. But this is in the pre-scientific era, he wrote that anyone with intelligence would recognize that this is there to teach us spiritual and moral lessons.
But
Anyway,
you know you're treading in deep waters when you're appealing to Origen, the the ancient heretic,
right.
right? To
Yeah.
make you, it's
Well, but
like,
that
oh,
was-
really? Is that?
As I was watching that discussion between Dr. Brown and Vocab Malone, Dr. Brown was co-signing all these non-literal ideas,
Right.
and it looked like Vocab was getting uncomfortable. Like, yo, I didn't bring you on to do that. Like, you were supposed to be giving us.
I couldn't help. I often think in terms of these sort of illustrations, and when he was talking, I was thinking a great analogy, maybe not a one-to-one, but when say for instance your girlfriend was been murdered, and then the cops come to you and they say provide us with an alibi, and you give them an alibi, but all the details in your alibi end up not checking out. And you say, well, the details aren't important. It's just important that you know I wasn't there. And I couldn't feel it. It's like, bro, that's the point in the alibi. You know, what's the point in your story if you told me this whole elaborate story, gave me chronology, all this stuff, and then later writers build on this, like Paul and Timothy, in the book of Timothy, where he says, you know, she was deceived, and
Yeah, but the
and
woman
he
was made first. Yeah, or the man was made first, and the woman
man
was
made
deceived.
first, and her subordination is based on that chronology. And it's like, what's the point in all of those details if the first verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens, is the whole point of the first opening chapters?
Well, Dr.
I mean,
Brown
you
would
could
say
have just
the
said that.
chronology of chapter 1 doesn't matter. He probably would say in
Right.
chapter 2 it does matter.
And you just unfolded the second problem, because Dr. Brown would say that. Right. But for every one Dr. Brown, you probably have two. This is the issue even when it came to abolition. For every Christian that was arguing for abolition from the text, you had some slaver arguing from the text for slavery. You know, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the ambiguity of the text. And it's like, yo, this is the best foot forward, this kind of ambiguity. It's like you're still, you know, let every man, it's almost like the book of Judges. Every man has to do what's right in his own eyes with this text.
Well, let's go back to your analogy about the alibi, right? Like
Yeah,
you said,
yeah.
if someone were to say to the cop, all you need to know is that I was not there. I didn't do it. Don't worry about the details in the story. I just told you the details to get
But
you to
that's the
believe I
whole
didn't do
point
it.
of the alibi.
Well, that's for the person who's listening to this saying, what does this have to do with Genesis? That sort of was Michael Brown's whole argument is these details about the text that don't check out, that now we know that those things can't be true. Those details don't matter. All that matters is God wanted us to know that he did it. It's like, wait a
I
minute.
shouldn't be laughing.
I believed this because I thought you nailed the details. Don't prove to me that you didn't nail the details and say, just believe I'm the one who did it.
What is an alibi if the details don't matter? You're just basically saying you're innocent. You're just claiming you're innocent. That's all you're doing. It's like you're not proving anything.
Anybody can make that claim. Yeah.
Anybody can make that claim.
I think about it in these terms. I don't know if the word lie comes in, but here's how it impacts me. The military has this thing called stolen valor. You ever heard of that concept?
No. Carry on.
Stolen valor is if you were to walk out tomorrow wearing the uniform of a U.S. Marines or Army
I think I get
enlisted,
it. Yeah, I think
right?
I get it. Yeah.
People will come up to you, thank you for your service. You know, they would let you get in line in front of them, and then someone from the military might come up and say, hey, what branch did you serve in? And if you can't answer, if you show any evidence that, oh, you didn't really serve, they would call that stolen valor. And they would, I mean, it could almost get physical because you don't do that kind of thing. For me, when I look at the reason why I bowed my knee to the God of the Bible, you told me about creation, and no one was there but you when the world came into being. So you would know. You would get those details right, and no one else would be able to. That's what gets you my worship. Everything else you tell me after that, I'm bound to believe because you did all of this. If you can make a world, of course you can raise the dead. You can whatever. But once you display, oh no, you didn't. So all the credit that I gave you, it feels like stolen valor. It feels like you're wearing the uniform of a creator, but you didn't do anything that a creator would do. When I say anything, I mean in terms of being able to accurately tell us what you did. Once we start saying, oh, well, this didn't happen, and oh, evolution might be true, and then this thing here, and then once you get into all these things, and you still have your God sitting there wearing the creator uniform, I'm like the military dude, like, yo, well, I guess I wouldn't be the military dude in this case. Whatever the real creator is can come to the God of the Bible and say, yo, give me back my props. Like, what are you talking about? And me as a worshiper, I'm like, you got all this credit for being creator when the thing that got you that credit, we're now saying, oh, it doesn't work that way. It's polemic. It's metaphorical. It's allegorical. It's all these other things, but it's still literal. It's just figuratively literal. Okay, then give me back my worship. Give me back my praise. Give me back my life until you find some kind of way to validate who I thought you were.
So those questions come up. And then where does Genesis fit with science and whether these literal days or not? You could say we have endless debates. No. We have no debate about why Genesis 1 is there. It's to teach us that God created the universe. That's why it's there. And that's what we all agree on. Well, the Bible didn't communicate well. Well, what was it trying to communicate? That one God, not many gods, one God created the entire universe. One God manifested his character, who he is. Genesis 1 is primarily there to teach us about God, not to teach us scientific data, which I'm going to demonstrate.
So let me just say this. I think it's always a bad move when people say Genesis is not there to teach us science. My response is always, I'm not saying it was there to teach us science. I think you have the wrong subject. My question is it there to teach us history? Are the things in the account historical?
Now let's move on. Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. He uses the word competing. And he says it's a final and most challenging problem facing early Genesis. The accounts are not just described as competing, Dr. Brown. They're described on page 53 as contradictory, irreconcilable. So, what do you think? What do you say? Genesis 1 and Genesis 2.
Yeah, no problem. They present no problem to me whatsoever. But let me explain why. And Brady's aware of this, but I'm going to reinforce it. Are you telling me that if one author wrote Genesis, or the early chapters of Genesis, or one author brought together the varied accounts of Genesis, that writing with the care with which this is written, I indicated Genesis 1, all of the numerical sevens and how those are repeated, and the detailed parallels between Genesis 1 and say, Exodus, and the creation account paralleled with the building of the tabernacle. I mean, detail after detail. It's quite striking. It's very inspirational, actually, quite striking. That someone that was so careful in literary structure, right, that either the person who wrote Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, or allegedly different sources and somebody put them together, that they could be that incredibly ignorant, that they didn't see that they put together irreconcilable accounts that anyone with a working brain would throw out. That to me strains credulity. That to me is so mind-boggling. It would be like saying that Vladimir Horowitz, the great pianist, I knew the man who used to be his piano tuner. right? One of the brilliant musicians of the last century, that he didn't realize that had his fingers down on the wrong keys when he started playing. He played the whole concerto on the wrong keys. It's mind-boggling to think that. So I have to ask, okay, why are these accounts here? And there are various ways to read them. One is to say that Genesis 1 was never intended to be chronological. It's meant to present theological truths about God the Creator laid out in a systematic 7-day schema. And Genesis 2 is now giving us chronological order. It's one way to read it. Another, Brady discusses this option. In the Hebrew, it's debatable to me, but so-called pluperfect or past perfect, that God had formed the animals and then having formed them previously, brought them to Adam. Is that a possible reading? Could be. Another way of understanding it is that this is now a unique thing taking place in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. And that this is God doing something distinct right there. All right, so he's now forming animals right there in this separated place from the rest of the world, in the Garden of Eden. That's also possible. But the thing to me, once again, is how could anyone with a working brain that could write something that people are now going to study and revere for centuries and centuries and consider sacred, make such stupid mistakes right out of the gate? So when I see that, I have to say, okay, well, obviously I'm reading something incorrectly. Now, again, there are scholars, top scholars, solid people, great thinkers, and in their mind, they have fully reconciled Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And some of the arguments to me are more convincing, some less convincing.
Let's give Michael Brown. Let's assume what he's saying. Let's just buy into it for a second. I mean, what you're and here's another problem you deal with, right? Is that you have a description and a chronology set out in Genesis 1, then you would assume that Genesis 2 would try to clarify or give more insight and detail into how said chapter before kind of unfolds, and then what you have there is actually no continuity at all whatsoever. So, in just just when you think about how we write stories or how people explain things, right? You summarize something, you give this high level overview, then you would try to expand that further, but you don't try to create more confusion. And what if we give if his assumption is right, that's what essentially is going on, that it's just creating more confusion in that, and then now you have to decide, well, what can you accept, or what dies the death of 1,000 qualifications in that sense. So it's a very strange assumption.
It's like an exercise in rendering a thing as elastic as possible,
right?
To avoid it being, because if a thing is open-ended enough, I mean, it's basically like, not to get political, it's like Donald Trump. It's like all right, well, one day it's this, and the next day it's another thing. Like if you leave a thing where we can't really pin you down, that's this. And politics, they call that flip flopping. You say one thing, and then somebody says something, and then you change your view. You change your view, or you change your statement about your view. I just found that very unhelpful. I'm sorry. I was actually stepping on your toes. You were just. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't want to step on your toes, Albert. It was the last.
Oh no. Just the point being made that why do we have Genesis 2 creating more confusion if we're going to grant Michael Brown's assumptions as well as a lot of other theologians, right?
Yeah.
Genesis 2 creates more confusion in that schema.
Michael Brown says he would have to be ignorant or insane to put these two competing stories together and not know that that's what he was doing. Well, you have people who would say, he knew what he was doing. It's just we're uncomfortable recognizing that that's what he was doing. And that's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
God put difficult books in the Bible.
Somebody might say he'd have to be insane if he were trying to teach monotheism to use words like us
yeah.
in English.
Right.
Like if you're trying to make it very clear that you're worshiping a singular personality, why would you start using plural language? Now, obviously, people would, I know some of your New Testament heads will be like, well, this is the mystery of the Trinity. Okay.
Yeah.
If that, some people are easily satisfied.
Yep. And I was once easily satisfied. Right. I was one of those people who saw the "Let us make mans" and the the different names for God and just thought either it was the Trinity or there's some kind of, you get into the Hebrew and maybe it all works out there. I was willing to be satisfied with those kind of explanations until I wasn't.
Right.
All right, so this will get into some of what we said a minute ago, but I'm going to just play this clip from Dr. Brown. We'll stop it, we'll talk about it, and we'll just keep it moving.
This scholar and that scholar, and was evaluating things. So I believe he did this very, very seriously.
He's talking about me here.
But I was honestly surprised to see these as issues that might contribute to someone falling away. Maybe this was 1/10 of what got him to fall away. But I mean, this is kind of basic stuff we've talked about for centuries, and I don't think should cause anyone even a split second of struggle in their faith. And I mean that with no disrespect to Brady, because I believe he's serious.
All right. So he says here, the issues that he, and Vocab talked about this a little bit before this moment, he had people read not the whole book and discuss it, chapters. Each person read the chapter of the book that they were responsible for critiquing. Some might have read more, but they were not responsible for reading more. So just off of reading this chapter, Dr. Brown says, the things in this chapter, I don't think anybody should be, not for a split second, caused to doubt their faith. What he misses is that this is not what caused me to doubt my faith. The whole purpose of this chapter, of chapter 3 that they're going to discuss, is if these things are not literal, then we have some room to question, are we being told the truth? That's the whole purpose of this chapter, right? The chapter before this is chapter 2, and the title of that chapter is, Has God Said? And chapter 2 kind of sets up chapter 3, where it's just basically saying, one of the things you expect from divine revelation is truth. But how do you know if you're being told the truth if someone is speaking to you in metaphors, or speaking to you in polemically, or speaking to you in all these non-literal ways? How can you tell whether or not you're being told the truth? If someone speaks literally, you can take what they literally say and you can weigh that against reality. It's verifiable. It's,
whoa, with the Western, whoa.
the Western intellectual imperialism.
Now enters Aristotle, like, as if as though they had a monopoly on just wanting to know what is up. Is dinner at 7:00?
But the idea of, there are other ways to communicate truth. You can communicate truth non-literally. But if you do that, you now...
You can only communicate truth, because you just use the I guess you would say the operative word here is communicate. It can only be communicated non-literally if the audience understands those idioms, or etc. If I'm totally in the dark on those things, now it seems that they're saying that the onus is on us, audience, thousands of years later, to learn and also to contend with all of the debating and the different schools of thought. Anyway, I'm going. This can lead to a whole rabbit trail. But you see what I mean? Like, you can only communicate non-literal truth to people using means and idioms that they can understand. Just like, I think we were speaking the other day, we use figures of speech all the time. Mm-hmm. We say, "Oh, he killed it."
Right.
That's not literal.
Right.
But we understand what that means.
Well,
but I have to understand that he killed it doesn't mean I literally went out and killed it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, what Dr. Brown is going to do is he's going to constantly use the term literally to mean non-literal, because he wants to be able to say it's literally true. But listen to how he explains literal. His explanation is always going to be non-literal. And all I'm saying in chapter 2 leading into chapter 3 is, if what the biblical authors are doing is communicating truth in a non-literal way, the non-literalness of it leaves us room to say, well, then how do we really know if it's true? You've got to at least give us room to say, you keep telling me I'm questioning the word of God, but if this is all a non-literal communication, how do I really know it's the word of God?
Well, especially when your non-literal take doesn't line up with Paul's.
Well, that's a different issue. That's a separate issue. Yeah, to get to.
Yeah.
But so I said all that just to say.
No, I understand. You're making a very specific argument here.
Yeah.
You're just saying the nature of knowledge, or I guess we would say epistemology, is in this case, so it requires a certain amount of clarity on what truth is. And if truth is being communicated in a way that we could never know whether you're telling me one thing or the other.
For Dr. Brown to say these issues shouldn't cause me to doubt, I just want to be clear, these issues didn't cause me to doubt. Right. These understanding them in a non-literal way just made me say, oh, well, then I need to do more work to find out what the literal truth is if it's non-literal. But then finding out how non-literal it is, it did make me say, okay, that's the point you got to do about Paul and Jesus. If they took it literally, well, then that forces me to say, how non-literal can I take it? So these issues do come up. Yeah.
And this is the big thing, because each of the videos, one person is like, oh, evolution led him there. The other person's Genesis 1 and 2 or whatever led him there. And what they're not realizing is what you're looking at is an aggregate of issues.
Right.
You're not looking, we're not single, I know some of you guys are Trumpers out there, but, newsflash, we're not single issue voters. Some of you guys who are, Trump, all he had to say is he was opposed to abortion and he had your vote. The guy could be the devil incarnate. If he says, I'm anti-abortion, he's got your vote. Well, that's not how it works with apostasy. At least not in my case.
And not in my case.
It's usually, it's a conglomerate. It's an aggregate of serious issues.
Right. And
that after a while,
well, I was going to say, and the arguments in the book, they accumulate. So if you read chapter 2 or chapter 4 or chapter 6, and you're not seeing how this ties together, you're going to think, oh, that's it? Oh, that's the only thing? Or that's the... No, this has been building, and the book builds that way.
What I found to be interesting, I think, especially this video, is that, we... whether it's kind of the mentality that is kind of trained in a presuppositionalist mind, or having that guard up, and taking your book and having distributing it amongst people and chopping up the chapters, and they've become very defensive, but also they don't pay attention to, and I'm saying this because I used to have a very similar mindset, where in your book you have a very specific narrative that you've constructed from beginning to end. And I think with people that have a certain preconception or a certain attitude going into this, it may be a little difficult for them to really get into that mode. Because when I was reading your book, right, I have the benefit of being out of it for 10 years, but at the same time, I seem to understand at least how you construct that narrative and how you're building that case kind of point from point. And it was interesting to me to see how vocab and, Michael Brown sort of jumping the gun, I would say, right? It's almost like they're, any kind of fact you point out and grabbing another scholar who, you're only adopting for a particular point, right? Not saying that you say, oh, this person agrees with me completely. No, you're building a case and you're building a narrative that I think is very compelling if people were to just kind of lay down some of their preconceptions and really read it on its own merits. So, that's been my, and everything about building that aggregate, building that complexity from one place, from the origin, and then expanding that argument. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that people could not approach it. Some people could not approach it in that way, in that manner. So,
yeah. So
is they're saying that your doubt is almost like a childlike doubt. I mean, it's ironic. You're talking about
as opposed to a
faith.
childlike faith, right?
Yeah, it's like they're like, hey, these are small issues. People have answered them a long time ago. I'm surprised you got through seminary and this is what got you. You know, that was the sense I got. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's good. That's
And
good.
you're saying if they're saying that, they don't understand the nature of the argument being set forth in the book.
Right.
Right.
Right. But now, to his credit, Dr. Brown did say maybe this is 1/10 of what caused him to doubt. Maybe there's more. So he's astute, I guess, in that sense.
Right.
But he's still talking about it as if this is the major issue, as if these are the major issues. And I even say, you know, starting off in chapter 3, we're going to begin in the shallow end of the water, of the pool. So if I say this is the shallow end, how do you begin to address it as if, wow, Brady, you think these are deep waters? Well, no, I just told you this is the shallow end. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So.
I'd like to add something to that, Brady.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. Which is a thought I had today, which is, at what point does the history begin?
What do you
Because
mean?
if you really look at it, you have Adam and Eve, then they give you their kids, then they give you their kids, and then eventually you work your way up in the same book to Abraham.
Yeah.
Or Abram.
Yeah.
You know, so he's said to be a descendant of a certain person who's a descendant of which you can trace back to the characters in chapter 1 and 2. So if you try to make this too, I guess you say meta, or just if you try to render it too amorphous and too non-literal, then how do we, at what point do you say, okay, now this is actually a historical figure and this happened? Like, and I would like to know who's the person who, it's almost like the man who arrives on the moon and puts a flag down. Like, who's the guy who puts the flag down and says, this is where history starts? And everything before here is sort of poetic and it's written in parallelism, even though it actually isn't. You know, but let's just grant you that it's all poetic, etc. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm laughing because there's
let
another.
alone the fact that, I mean, you take Luke's genealogy, right? That traces
Yeah.
all the way back to Adam. Like, who
Yeah.
puts the who puts the scissors in that one? You know?
Yeah.
Well, Dr.
Yeah,
Brown would
exactly.
say,
You know?
Dr. Brown would say, these things are, what does he say? He says they're true. He would say literally true, even if they're not chronologically in order, or even if he's got these ways where he makes it so elastic that it can still be true, even though it's not going to be true in the way that you want it to be.
It could be true if it was a lie.
Basically.
If it was literally not what happened and somebody said, and it was like, well, they didn't mean, like, again, we go back to the alibi. I don't have to do the illustration again. At what point are you just telling me a story?
Well, he quotes, well, not quotes, but he makes a reference to John Walton, another Old Testament scholar. And John Walton would say, hey, maybe something did happen between a God and early humans, and the Genesis narrative is just the way to convey that, though we don't know the details. We may never know the details about what happened there. The Genesis story was just a way to tell us that something did happen, and that thing was so traumatic that it caused this rift between God and man.
Well, isn't
Very
that
elaborate.
insightful?
Yeah.
Because it's like you don't need a whole narrative to tell you something happened.
Well, yeah.
Clearly we're here and something happened to get us here. Like, I already knew that before I read your before I read your story. I already knew we got here some way. I mean, I thought your story came here to bring me some clarity as to how we got here. But you know, I'm the fundamentalist.
Well, but that's
You know?
that's one of the critiques is the people who want this story to add up are too fundamentalist in their approach to these texts.
Yeah.
What would you say to
Yeah.
that?
I would say that that's not what they dole out on Sunday mornings. Clearly.
What would you say to that?
That's, I mean, as implausible as Jesus walking on water and feeding thousands of people. So I don't know where you draw the lines there, or what's the framework? That's the question I would ask.
Right. Well, this is the thing. The framework is miracle. You're dealing with a God who can do miracle, and so if basically,
Even with logic.
well, the miracles get you out of all the holes that logic puts you in.
Right.
God of the gaps in this realm too, I guess.
But it's God of the gaps in his own story. It's one thing if it was just God of the gaps of science. This is God in the gaps of the story that God told.
It's like, bro, you had the will. You could have taken us anywhere you wanted to take it, and you chose to take us to talking snakes. Like, bro, you could have made it sound as plausible. It's like some people will even argue for the veracity of it based on its absurdity. They'll say like it has to be true because there's a talking snake. It's like
who would
any
tell
way
that
you-
kind of story? But
Any way you cut it, they got to argue it
Yeah.
for a bit, you know?
Yeah.
Who's going to say that a donkey talked? The donkey clearly had to talk. No, that's not how it works, you know?
and that's part of the. I think I
Wow.
bring this up in the early chapters of the book. You have two different groups of people: the ones who will argue for
Yeah.
the literal nature of the text, and the ones who will say, clearly, if there's a talking snake and a talking donkey and magical trees, then clearly
This
this has.
happened.
Well, no. That's the literal side. The other side will say, clearly, if those elements are there, we know that those things can't be true, and so it must be simply there to teach us bigger spiritual lessons. And so,
Well, Michael Brown quoted Origin saying that.
right, well, that's what I'm saying.
Remember?
Yeah, so you have
He
these.
was like, yeah, clearly this isn't to be taken seriously, like
well,
literally.
Not yet. Taken seriously, just not literally. But my
Yeah, I
issue
mean,
is,
yeah.
so you've got these two strands, like, well, then which is it? And the question that I ask people is, when I have these conversations with people, I say, okay, well, if you've got all this ambiguity on how this text is supposed to be taken, what do you preach?
Well, no, you want the answer to that?
Oh, I know the answer. Well, how would you answer if you were them?
The answer is both. The answer is both.
No, that's not what they say. You know what they say? I preach.
No,
I preach Jesus. I don't deal with all that.
No. The reason why I say the answer is both is from what I've been able to deduce about Vocab Malone on other videos, he falls more into the fundamentalist camp, it seems. He's more of a literalist than what Dr. Brown is setting forth. But look, what do you know? They're bedfellows. They're on the same screen together right here.
Well,
They're together.
the enemy
It's-
of my
it's like-
enemy is my friend.
Is my friend. So the fact that they might be bickering about the literalness or non-literalness of this is not really that important because they have a bigger fish to fry, or shall we say book
Yeah.
fry.
To burn. A bigger
To
book
burn, exactly. They got a bigger book to burn, and it's like, well, I will join forces with somebody who basically is up for claiming none of this stuff is important in the first two chapters in terms of nothing outside of the claim that God is the sole creator of everything is really all that important there. But I guess they would join with a Dr. Brown if they had to debunk your book, and
Right.
it's like basically
Because
I could
he's
take a piece from you.
He's the resident Hebrew scholar. So you're going to go to
Yeah.
someone who, hey, Brady says the Hebrew's not being translated right. What do you say? But then once
Mm-hmm.
you get in that chair, now you've got him making all these allowances for how
Right.
unliteral the text is. Yeah.
But notice, this is the perfect face on Vocab Malone's face right there, because it's like, just look at it. It's like
I wasn't
Dr.
expecting
Brown
all
is
this.
over here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that frustrated me, Brady, was Dr. Brown's constant appeal to authorities. You know, he was always talking about, oh, there are smarter people than you, than me, who can harmonize these things, and blah, blah, blah. How do you respond to that? Because it's obviously fallacious reasoning, right?
Oh, for sure.
You
Well, he makes two comments, like he's talking out both sides of his mouth. On one hand, he talks about how much work he can tell I put into this book. On the other hand, he talks about how paltry my sampling is of the scholars who speak on this issue. First of all, there is no end to the number of scholars speaking on this issue, and if I tried to include them all, the book would have never ended. Second of all, appealing to a scholar to say one thing about this passage doesn't really help because there are any number of Hebrew scholars who will disagree with them. So I'm not appealing to anyone for authority on here's how you should take it. I'm appealing to these scholars for see how diverse the views are on this passage. This should tell us something. Not take Michael Brown's view because he's a Hebrew scholar, or not take John Walton's view, or not take John Collins' view, or not take any of their views because they're scholars. Look at how all these scholars look at this text and come to different conclusions. You mean to tell me that's what an all-wise, all-powerful God did to reveal himself? That's why I'm appealing to these scholars.
And these two brothers here on the screen are an illustration, a smaller illustration of that very point. I mean, they probably have differing views on a lot of that stuff, and they're both under the canopy of Christianity, to use a word reference to Genesis 1.
Yeah.
They're both under the dome of Christianity, all of them residing.
Hey, out of respect for Al's time, let me get to a few more of these real quick.
Sure. Yeah.
One is kind of interesting to me. Dare I say funny, but we'll talk about it in a second. I'm going to reserve my comments. I want you guys to speak first.
Sure.
And I'll say I want you to speak first, Albert. I've done plenty.
Okay.
Let me know if this sounds
Seton
good.
Hall University summarizes patterns that biblical scholars have noticed for years.
He's going to quote another scholar.
Genesis 1:1 contains 7 words. Genesis 1:2 has 14 words, 2 times 7. And God, the name God, Elohim, or the term God, occurs 35 times, 5 times 7 in the 7-day account. The term earth occurs 21 times, 3 times 7. Heaven's firmament, 21 times, 3 times 7. The phrase "and it was so" appears 7 times, as well as the phrase "God saw that it was good." The important words light and day are found 7 times in the first natural paragraph, and there are 7 references to light in the 4th paragraph. In the section dealing with the creation of animals, the Hebrew word for living beings occurs 7 times. In the 7th paragraph, which deals with the 7th day, there occur 3 consecutive sentences that each contains 7 words, and the phrase "7th day" in the center. Moreover, the Hebrew words in the 7th paragraph total 35, 5 times 7. Okay, what's the point of that? It's just to say it's carefully crafted.
Let him finish.
It's carefully crafted in a lyrical, almost poetic way. And when you read it, what you get from it is God created, and this is who God is.
All right. I'm just thoughts. Does that not blow you away, Albert? Does that not show you how?
So how is that relevant? So the relevancy, right? It's the relevancy question here. I mean, what is that?
That an author took care to put that kind of mathematical precision into the poetry and lyricism of that text. So he's not a careless author.
Right.
Look at all the
Brady, you know better.
I'm just throwing him a oop. I'm throwing him a oop.
You know, Rick Phillips destroys the. I think it was Rick Phillips in that video who destroyed the idea.
Well, hold on.
That it was.
Hold that thought. Go ahead, Al.
So in my mind, the thought and care, right? Once again, this goes back to a little bit in terms of why I left the faith, right? I mean, the simplest explanation is that these are mythical stories. They are fictional. They're calculated. They are of a certain time in a narrative. I mean, when Dr. Brown talked about how, the point of it was that it's supposed to be an antithesis towards the mythology of the day. It's
polemic.
It was right, a polemic of the day. A myth debunking another myth. I don't see how that's right. Just by contrast, you're one fiction over another. When we take the mythical story and use that as an explanation that God constructed a false conception of the universe, and by false conception we're talking about the light, the dome. I don't know how you're actually constructing a persuasive argument for the historical truth of what he's talking about.
Gotcha.
These are, to me, highly, precisely devised, I think, in a way. I mean, the real world doesn't work that way. It doesn't. I don't know. That's my take.
Yeah. Okay.
On that one.
Jay Witt, talk to us.
Okay. there are theologians and scholars who argue that part of the reason why this is debated so heavily, because when people try to argue that this is poetry, and Brown was careful in his wording, if you recall, he said it's almost, I think he used the word almost poetic, or that phrase, because he knows that it doesn't really fall under any category of known Hebrew poetry.
Right.
There's certain kind of parallelisms and devices that are used in strict Hebrew poetry that are not being used in those passages. So for all of those who want to claim it's poetic, they have a very hard time proving that textually. Right. So he's making a claim, and again, he's talking. It almost sounds like numerology or something.
That's what I have in my notes. In my notes, I put numerology here. Yeah,
got it.
It's like Da Vinci Code type nonsense, and it's like, well, first of all, we know that the text wasn't broken up into chapters the way
that was my main point
for us.
That was my main point.
Okay, so I guess I'm thinking right along the same. So it's like, when you start saying, "Oh, in this chapter is this," oh yeah, you're acting like the chapters were in the original text. You're a scholar of Hebrew.
The chapters and verses were not added until the 1500s.
Exactly.
So you don't have these 7 verses, 7 this and 35. You don't have that in the original text. You just have a scroll with text on it, without chapters and verses.
So those numbers start falling apart when you don't have chapters.
Right.
So it's like, here you have Dr. Brown, who knows better, and this is an example of gaslighting. Mm-hmm. Like, he's a doctor. His name is Dr. Brown. He's been educated. He knows better, but he's talking to an uneducated audience. And even me, a non-theologically educated, at least not at a seminary, I can sit here. I was exposed as a layperson to seminary stuff, a lot of it, and enough of it to know that he's talking a bunch of BS here. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like, I was able to just sift right through it while he was saying it. It's like, first of all, this sounds a lot like Da Vinci Code. Like, relax with all of the numbers, right. Okay? But then second of all, I know that the chapter divisions weren't added until much later. So those numbers actually don't hold as much weight when you stop thinking about the book being divided up into chapters. So I basically reiterated the point, but you get what I mean. What do you think of that, Brady, though?
What's that?
He has to know better. Like, he knows.
I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. I don't know how he's able to hear another scholar make that, like you said, almost numerology claim and countenance it. Like, why is that just not laughed out of the conversation? I have no idea why.
Well, in some sense, it's accepted when you think about Revelations, right? All the imagery that's given there. So I don't know, right? It's not that.
But no, that's different. That's different, Al, because in Revelation, there are actual numbers being given out. This is a person counting the amount of times a certain word.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And then superimposing it onto a text, literally, because the text has been divided up into chapters, and saying, okay, he did it this amount of times in chapter 1. What are you talking about, bro?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, that's even more.
What is that?
It's egregious. Yeah.
It's either dishonest or
right.
It's either dishonest or it's ignorant. There's really no other. That's the only two options. Either he doesn't know better or he knows better and he's being dishonest. Which makes, I don't know. I don't want us to be returning the insult on his intelligence that he's trying to dish out to Brady. So I want to indulge in Christian charity here.
Okay.
Like the book we're interacting with. On page 43 says, well, if this passage does not tell us the little truth about the creation of our world, then it is either figurative or fiction. In either case, how do we know whether we should take the rest of the account figuratively or literally? In what way can this text be seen as God-breathed out revelation? And if we struggle to answer this question, should we be more cautious before labeling it the Word of God, such that it cannot be questioned? So that's what he says.
No. There's no question about what it's telling us. God created the universe. It's laid out in a 7-day schema. Does it mean God days? 1 day is 1,000 years, which the Bible tells us. Does it mean 24-hour days? Is it just a literary schema? You could debate that all you want. But what is literally true is that God alone created the universe.
All right, skipping ahead.
Translated. But let's put the worst case scenario on it, okay? And let's just say that the perception of the writer of Genesis 1 was, or what's being said in Genesis 1, was that there is like a metal expanse that covered the sky above us, that it had windows, and that when the windows were open, it would rain. Okay? And that's what was said there. That wouldn't faze me in the least. All it would be saying is, as God is conveying to us that he created the world in terms that were understood and used then, just like we still talk about the sun rising and the sun setting, even though it doesn't, or the four corners of the earth, which does not support a flat earth thinking, it's just observational, right? So using terms that were familiar with the people then and saying God's the one who did all this and arranged all this, fine. I wouldn't even have a problem with that.
All right. So he says here, basically, the Bible is literally true. It's literally true when it figuratively tells us that God created the universe. So it's literally true. And if it was telling us that God made a metal dome and had to open the window so that it could rain, wouldn't faze me in the least, because all it's literally telling us is that God made everything.
Brother, you, by showing me that you're credulous, you've proven nothing. Like, that's the only thing you've proven here, is that how easily convinced and how credulous you are. You know, I really don't know. I mean, saying that wouldn't faze him, what does that even mean? That's not an argument. It wouldn't faze. If I said it wouldn't faze me, okay, now I'm a person who could believe something that's ridiculous. That doesn't mean that it's true. You know, you get what I'm saying. That you're not arguing for its veracity by saying you could make room for that in your. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not a truth.
But I think it is arguing for veracity. If someone like a Dr. Brown can believe it, then it's believable.
Yeah, but that's another appeal to authority. Like, you know, it's like whatever. People who are, like I said, Francis Collins, who's a leading geneticist, he's a Christian. I think he's wrong. That doesn't mean he's right just because he's a geneticist and he has a certain kind of expertise in the field of genetics. You know what? You know, I think yeah, you're right. His argument is an appeal to authority, and he's appealing to his own erudition and learnedness, and saying, "Hey, it wouldn't faze me. It's fazed Brady, and he's not as learned in Hebrew as I am. So therefore, this is a tenable position." And it's like, okay, whatever.
The pattern that I have noticed for a very long time, and whenever Christians and Orthodox people try to argue against cults, right? Whether it's Jehovah's Witness or Mormons, the things that they accuse, the theology of the cults, right, and how they interpret Scripture, they would commit the same thing themselves if they were to essentially be pushed in a corner. So what Dr. Brown is doing here is essentially he's creating a non-falsifiable scenario for himself. You see the same thing, I remember I've seen debates with, Jehovah's Witnesses where, the Christian would point out, like, in John 1, right, when we talk about the whole debate about the definite article, right, then you would, they would show them, well, if you talk about the context of the chapter, it's about the glory, right, the glory that belonged to God, right, that's assigned to Jesus himself, right. And Jehovah's Witness would look at that and be like, I have no problem with that. Yeah, that's fine. It's fine. You look at the matrices and how Orthodox Christians talk about the Trinity, right, and all that stuff. And you show the same exact passages to a Jehovah's Witness, and they would have no problems, no quarrels with it at all. They would have some other way to interpret it, maybe, but it's almost like that. The entire methodology kind of breaks down, and they're willing to accept not having one, basically,
Wow.
in order to explain it away. That's how I would view Dr. Brown in this case here. So,
or like the Mormon who claimed to have seen the golden plates that Joseph Smith had, and later in his life he admitted he didn't see him, but he saw him with the eye of faith.
Well, you know what? I wasn't going to bring this up, but Earlier in this interview, Dr. Brown recounts his and my personal interaction. We interacted back when I first put my deconversion video out.
Right.
He wrote a I guess
A think piece.
a think piece on me, and it was very compassionate. And so I reposted it on my Facebook page, which led to he and I doing a Zoom conversation. After that Zoom conversation, he went online and told people, hey, this brother has legitimate questions. We need to allow him to ask these questions, and we need to just pray that he'll have an experience with God that will get him over these hurdles. Then he and I, we interacted via Facebook Messenger and email back and forth a couple times. And then he says in this interview with Vocab Malone, he says, I don't know why the back and forth stopped. I don't know whose turn it was to reply. Actually, it was my turn to reply, and I never did. Because what Dr. Brown began to, and I hope I'm not saying too much, I won't say more than I think I should. He began to get into his personal testimonies and ask me if I had any personal experiences of the power of God in my life. And I did have some. Things that I interpreted as that must have been God in the past, that I've had to since reinterpret. And he began to share some personal ones that he had. And he said, so this is why I believe, despite whatever issues you might have with the text, I know I've experienced God in these ways. And the reason why I didn't respond was because I did not want to get into trying to pick apart how his personal experiences could very well have been life happening, coincidence. I'm not going to try to take that away from anyone. Those are your experiences, fine. But at that point, we're not talking about anything that's falsifiable anymore. Like you just said, Jay Witt, now you're seeing things through the eyes of faith, and you're able to connect these dots that somebody else would say, I wouldn't connect those dots that way. Even if I once did as a Christian, I don't anymore. But once you go into that realm of your personal experiences, what can I say? My book is more for the people who are trying to match your personal experiences to what you see in this text. This text cannot be used to verify that anymore, is what I'm saying.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you sum everything up beautifully there.
Yeah.
That might be a good place to stop here. You think?
Well, what
do you think?
Let me
What do you
add
think,
on this the apology I wanted to give to Michael Brown. When I jumped on the live, before I got on, I was in the chat. And in the chat, it was a horrible way to try to voice my opinion, because they were live. They were live talking to, each other and responding to different chats that were coming in. People were paying money to make chats. I was not paying money, so my chats were kind of just in this long thread.
The money changers.
My chats were in the long thread.
They're making it rain in the chat. They're making it rain.
And they were reading my responses much later than when I'd actually made them. So I made one response saying to Dr. Brown, like, hey, Dr. Brown, I don't think you realize, like, I'm not saying what you guys are saying that I'm saying. And then I made another chat, another comment where I was saying to the people in the chat, since I didn't feel like Vocab and Dr. Brown were able to even see what I was saying at the moment. So I turned my attention to the people in the chat who were basically just dissing me left and right. And I said, hey, I hope you all realize that the man who's speaking right now, referring to Dr. Brown, hope you see him fudging and basically admitting everything I say in my book. I don't want to say I was taking out of context. I probably should not have used the word fudging, because fudging means lying or trying to, finagle. And I wasn't trying to say that Dr. Brown was lying or trying to do anything unsavory.
Right.
What I really was trying to say was, if you realize Dr. Brown is really just saying we can't take these things literally. Even though he's saying we can take them literally, the way he's defining literally is in a figurative way. That's why I used the word fudging. But I wasn't trying to insinuate that Dr. Brown was lying or anything like that. So I owe him an apology for for saying something that made it look like that I thought he was lying. But I do think there's something to saying something's literal, and then when you define what literal means, you define it as figurative. I think that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate you guys' time. I appreciate your minds and your hearts. Like there are hearts and lives behind these ex testimonies, these extemonies here, and like I said, Jehovah's Witness protection, that is not a joke or a jab. There is actually a very serious reason why our other guest is not revealing his identity. So even though it may be laughable, we've distorted his voice so that people who might recognize his voice don't recognize his voice. It may be kind of like funny. Like Albert and I both laughed when we saw that image. So yeah, there's some comedy to it, but there are some serious reasons why we have not why he has not disclosed his identity, and we'll talk about that next time. So, brothers, thank you for your time. Yeah, sign off. Yep, go ahead.
Interestingly enough, like you guys' hero, I'm assuming that we want to largely have a Christian audience. Like your hero Paul in what's it, Acts 13. At some point, he says something along the lines of. He and Barnabas at that point said they were going to go to the Gentiles. It was after they had been rejected basically by the Jews. And it's interestingly enough it's interesting to draw an analogy in our situation here. He tried to have a civil conversation with you guys about his book. You guys have repeatedly made bad faith arguments, refused to understand him in a proper context, refused to read the book in its entirety and give it an appropriate summary response, even making a real cheap attempt with William Mendoza at making a full book review where you just kind of went chapter after chapter just finding a thing here or there to laugh about. And so, not to drag this out any longer, but just like Paul and Barnabas had to turn from the Jews and then go to the Gentiles, just like he's had to reach out to fellow unbelievers to just fully discuss what he actually wrote, because the believing audience refused to just be honest in their review of his book. And so, like you said, we've gotten a lot of laughs and jokes, but this is really, I want you guys to never forget that what led me out of the faith was a search for truth and honesty. And that didn't change. And I didn't lose a moral compass when in fact, this was necessary to maintain a sense of morality and ethics. I had to leave. And this conversation is the fruit of such a mind with Brady. This is the fruit of words matter. I mean, all you presuppositionalists who want to say, "What's your basis?" Well, what's your basis for not doing an honest read of his book? Why do three infidels have to come together to have an honest discussion of his book?
That's a great wow. I would have never put that together, but that's a great thought. But I do want to say this before I let Albert sign off as well. I do want to say, not every Christian has responded the way that the gaggle of folks that Vocab Malone has gathered. I am in several ongoing dialogues with people who still believe, yet see the value of my book. And as challenging as it is to them, they're offering challenges to me. And the conversations have been ongoing for months since the book came out. So not everyone is responding in a dishonest way. Matter of fact, some people have called out some of the people that Vocab have got together. Some people have called them out on their dishonesty. So I do appreciate those of you who are taking the book seriously and dealing with it as, hey, these are ideas that we really need to pay attention to. So that being said,
be Bereans. Be Bereans, man.
Albert, any last words for
No, I mean, no irony. I mean, there is a bit of irony there, but be Bereans. Actually examine the things to see if they're actually true. What we're saying about the book. Seriously.
And
any last words for the night, Al?
Yeah. I mean, if you can take anything away from, I think, one of the things that I really appreciated from you, Brady, is the tone in your book. I think it's a great tone, and I think the people that are listening, if you can kind of take away some of that and kind of see how it's more the voice in terms of how you constructed, the narrative, I think is a really good one. And if there's anything to take away, it's really to rethink, just to be a little more open and think about, what he's saying and take it at face value. And it's not, I really trust, when you told me from the beginning that this is your way of really having an honest conversation with everyone, I really do trust that. And I think, you as an educator, you've been doing it for such a long time, um, how you've interacted with people, in interviews and things like that, I think has been really refreshing. Even in the way you responded to BK, in that way, I think how you kind of opened the door in terms of how you've constructed your arguments, how you constructed your just the flow of thought and things like that, and the scholarship involved in that, I think has been really I've enjoyed it a lot, and I've learned from it myself. So
Good stuff.
that's yeah.
Good stuff. I appreciate you guys. I look forward to it the next time we get a chance to talk.
All right.
Go ahead and enjoy your night. Much love, everyone. You can leave
All right.
comments below, and we'll get together soon. Peace.
All right, peace.
All right. Bye bye.